In recent days, President Donald Trump has hinted at a drastic move invoking the Insurrection Act, a step he's considered before. His frustration is palpable, as his administration has long faced challenges in responding to civil unrest, notably during the George Floyd protests. But what Trump has been unable to do until now, sending in soldiers to suppress protests, may finally be within his reach. This isn't just a reaction to the current unrest in Minneapolis, but rather the culmination of years of political ambition and strategic shifts in the power dynamics of American governance. Trump has always eyed this moment, and with his second term now in full swing, he's built the infrastructure necessary to make this happen. In his mind, the situation in Minneapolis is the perfect storm. But is this move truly about law and order, or is it the next step in a long-standing ambition to assert his dominance over the American political system? Stay tuned as we unravel the story behind Trump's relentless drive for state violence. Let's look at the history behind these tensions and why Trump has been so eager to invoke this measure. The desire to invoke the Insurrection Act is not just a knee-jerk reaction to recent events. It is in fact part of a broader long-term strategy that Trump has carefully cultivated since the early days of his presidency. This isn't just about Minneapolis, it's about a deeper dissatisfaction with how his authority has been challenged, both by political opponents and members of his own administration. Back in 2020, during the protests sparked by the killing of George Floyd, Trump was denied the full force of the military to suppress what he saw as a growing threat. When protests erupted in Washington, D.C., Trump was hurried to the bunker beneath the White House. That moment, a symbol of vulnerability, fueled his desire to never be in a position where he seemed weak again. In the aftermath, Trump began to consider more extreme measures to ensure that his power could not be questioned. Now, as he enters his second term, his frustration with the establishment, the system, and his political opponents has reached a boiling point. The shift in his approach is clear. This time, he won't waste time. If unrest erupts again, Trump seems ready to respond with the full might of the military. To understand this more deeply, we need to look back at the history of these tensions and how they have shaped Trump's decisions. To truly understand Trump's current drive for invoking the Insurrection Act, we need to step back in time and examine the historical roots of this moment. The framework for today's political tensions was laid in the early years of Trump's presidency. From the outset, he made it clear that he sought to restore what he considered the rightful power of the executive branch. He openly criticized the limits of presidential power and pushed the boundaries of the office. The killing of George Floyd in 2020 was a catalyst that put these tensions on full display. Protests, violent clashes, and widespread unrest unfolded across the country, forcing Trump to confront a challenge to his authority that he hadn't anticipated. The response was swift, but it wasn't enough to meet his ambitions. Although Trump deployed the National Guard in some cities, he faced resistance, particularly from state and local leaders who opposed the federal government's intervention. The weakness shown during those events left Trump embittered. Fast forward to 2024. Trump is now well versed in the levers of power, and he's surrounded by allies who share his vision of a more authoritarian response to dissent. With the right personnel in place, there is no longer any restraint on his actions. What began as frustration with being thwarted in 2020 has now escalated into a clear plan to wield unchecked power. But Trump's desire to act doesn't come without its consequences. The first mini-crisis, the real-life manifestation of his unchecked power, is already playing out on the streets. The unrest in Minneapolis is more than just a flashpoint. It's a trigger, a moment that could set the wheels in motion for Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act. But before we see that, we need to understand what is already happening on the ground. Federal agents are being deployed across the city in a show of force, and their presence is escalating tensions. In recent weeks, we've seen ICE and other federal agencies sweep through Minneapolis in an operation that's been described as aggressive, if not outright hostile. The narrative put forward by Trump's administration is that these measures are necessary to apprehend dangerous criminals, illegal immigrants, violent offenders who are somehow slipping through the cracks of local law enforcement. However, the reality is far murkier. Reports from the ground have painted a different picture. Federal agents knocking on doors, detaining individuals who have no criminal records, and escalating confrontations with local communities. What began as an operation aimed at apprehending undocumented criminals has turned into an indiscriminate roundup of residents, sparking outrage and resistance. This is no longer just a local issue in Minneapolis. It's a matter of national significance. Trump's administration has not only embraced this military-style policing, they've actively sought out situations like these to justify the next steps in their quest for control. The first mini-crisis is unfolding right now as federal agents face increasing pushback from protesters and the public, creating the very conditions Trump needs to call for further action. As the protests intensify, the hidden mechanisms behind these federal operations begin to surface, a deeper agenda that has yet to be fully understood. What seems to be a reaction to isolated incidents of unrest is in reality part of a much larger and more deliberate strategy. The federal response in Minneapolis, while ostensibly aimed at curbing crime, reveals deeper mechanisms at play. Trump's administration is not just cracking down on illegal immigrants, it is reshaping how the government views law enforcement and protest. The actions of ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and other agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, are being framed as necessary responses to protect American communities. However, the reality is more insidious. In many cases, agents aren't just targeting criminal immigrants, they're sweeping up individuals without criminal records, including American citizens, creating a climate of fear. This aggressive stance marks a departure from previous law enforcement tactics, with data showing a dramatic shift toward detaining people who have no criminal history at all. These are not just rogue operations. The sweeping detentions in Minneapolis and beyond are the result of policy changes authorized by the highest levels of the Trump administration. The administration has emboldened these agencies, encouraging them to push the boundaries of federal authority. As a result, communities across the country are now facing the reality of an out-of-control federal police state. As the situation spirals, we see another escalation, a second mini-crisis that signals even darker times ahead. As tensions escalate in Minneapolis, the second mini-crisis emerges, an unmistakable sign that Trump's administration is prepared to take even bolder steps. Federal agents, faced with increasing resistance from local communities and protesters, begin deploying more aggressive tactics, including tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbangs. These are not isolated actions, but part of a growing pattern of state-sponsored violence aimed at quelling dissent. The images emerging from the streets of Minneapolis, billowing smoke, explosions, and protesters struggling to protect themselves from chemical agents, create a powerful narrative. It's not the protesters causing the chaos, it's the federal agents themselves waging a war of attrition against the very people they are meant to protect. And yet the Trump administration frames these acts as necessary to restore order. When DHS officials speak to the press, they focus on the so-called threat posed by the protesters, even as it's clear that these tactics are designed not to protect, but to intimidate. The violence on the streets is now a tool, a pretext for justifying the next phase, the invocation of the Insurrection Act. This second mini-crisis brings into sharp focus the reality that Trump isn't simply responding to a moment of crisis, he's manufacturing one. And as the violence escalates, it becomes easier for him to claim that the use of military force is not just necessary but inevitable. As the dust settles, the focus shifts to the real victims, the American people caught in the crossfire of this escalating conflict. How does this affect them? As federal agents intensify their presence on the streets of Minneapolis, the true cost of this crackdown is becoming evident, not just in the damage to property, but in the very fabric of American society. For the residents of Minneapolis, this is no longer a political issue, it's a personal one. Families, individuals, and communities are being torn apart as federal agents detain people indiscriminately, including U.S. citizens who have no ties to criminal activity. The protesters in particular are caught between the state's might and their own deeply held beliefs. They are standing up not just for a cause, but for their right to exist without the constant fear of government overreach. Yet the message from Trump's administration is clear. Defiance will be met with overwhelming force. The streets are flooded with agents who are not just protecting public order, but creating an atmosphere of fear and distrust. This growing tension isn't just a political crisis, it's an emotional one. Families are torn apart as loved ones are detained, often without clear cause. Communities that once felt safe are now living in the shadow of federal power, unsure of who will be next. The cost to the social fabric is immeasurable, and the emotional toll on individuals and families is profound. This is the reality of unchecked state violence, and it's happening right now in cities across America. But this isn't just a domestic issue. The ripples of this aggression extend far beyond our borders, affecting the global stage. While the situation in Minneapolis is playing out in real time, its effects are being felt far beyond the United States. The actions of the Trump administration are not isolated incidents. They have global implications that reverberate across the geopolitical landscape. Trump's decision to escalate the use of federal force against his own citizens sends a dangerous message to authoritarian regimes around the world. In places like Russia, China, and even Brazil, where strongmen leaders have long sought to consolidate power, Trump's moves are seen as a blueprint, a model for using state violence to quell dissent and maintain control. Furthermore, the broader international community is watching closely. Democratic nations, especially those that have long championed human rights and the rule of law, are now questioning the United States' commitment to these principles. The sight of U.S. citizens being detained without due process and subjected to violent tactics will undoubtedly affect America's standing on the world stage. Trump's actions could even embolden adversaries. If the U.S. government is willing to use military force against its own people, what does this say about its commitment to global peace? How can the U.S. continue to lecture other nations on human rights while its own citizens face the full force of government repression? The repercussions of this internal violence may well spill over into diplomatic relations, affecting alliances, trade agreements, and international security. With the global stakes rising, it's essential to consider what the future holds. What are the possible outcomes, and how might this crisis evolve? As we look toward the future, there are three potential scenarios that could unfold, each shaped by the decisions of the Trump administration and the reactions of both the American people and the global community. Scenario 1. The iron fist prevails. In this scenario, Trump's use of force continues to escalate. The Insurrection Act is invoked, and the military is deployed to quash any remaining protests. The president, emboldened by his success in suppressing dissent, tightens his grip on power. Political opposition weakens as the courts, the media, and the legislative branch struggle to push back against an increasingly authoritarian regime. International condemnation grows, but it's mostly symbolic. Trump's focus remains on securing his hold over the country, and the societal cost is steep. Civil liberties are restricted, and public trust in government collapses. America, once a beacon of democracy, finds itself in the midst of a new era of state violence. Scenario 2. Backlash and resistance. In this scenario, the overwhelming use of force sparks a massive backlash. Protests intensify, not just in Minneapolis, but across the nation. The country becomes divided, with large segments of the population rejecting Trump's tactics and demanding reform. Local and state governments, emboldened by their resistance to federal overreach, begin to push back against the administration's heavy-handed approach. Internationally, U.S. allies begin to question their support, and diplomatic pressure mounts. This resistance creates a dangerous political environment where civil unrest and clashes with federal forces become routine. The situation becomes a standoff, and the future of the nation remains uncertain, with a struggle for the soul of America at its core. Scenario 3, a return to normalcy. The third possibility is a return to a more stable but perhaps more compromised status quo. Trump may face increasing pressure from both domestic and international forces to de-escalate. The costs of his aggressive policies, both in terms of public backlash and geopolitical ramifications, may push him to back down. This could involve a scaled-back use of federal force, a re-evaluation of immigration policies, and a return to more conventional forms of political maneuvering. The threat of military intervention fades, but the damage to the nation's unity and trust in its leadership lingers. The U.S. may recover from this crisis, but it will never be quite the same. As we examine these possible futures, one thing is certain: the next steps taken by Trump and his administration will have lasting consequences for the nation and the world. As we approach the final moments of this analysis, one undeniable truth emerges: the choices being made today will shape the future of America for generations to come. Whether it's the unchecked use of federal force, the rise of authoritarianism, or the ongoing battle for civil liberties, the stakes have never been higher. President Trump's actions are not just a response to unrest, they are the culmination of years of political ambition to consolidate power and push the boundaries of presidential authority. As the Insurrection Act looms as a real possibility, the world is watching. The question remains: will America stand for its founding ideals, or will it succumb to a new era of state violence? The consequences of these decisions will echo far beyond Minneapolis. What happens next is not just about one president or one political party, it's about the future of democracy itself. Now, more than ever, it's crucial to stay informed and remain vigilant. The future is in our hands. Will we accept a future where the state wields unchecked power, or will we rise to protect the rights and freedoms that define this country? The choice is ours,